Now, it's been our endeavor to get you voices and opinions from around the world. And what better way than to ask someone who is familiar with India but looks at it from the outside. I'm talking about Dhruva Jaishankar. He is the Director, United States Initiative of the Observer Research Foundation. ORF is a public policy think tank headquartered in New Delhi, but Dhruva Jaishankar is based in Washington, D.C. I spoke to him earlier to get a sense of the situation in the U.S., the U.S.-China row over the origin and spread of the coronavirus, and the World Health Organization's role in all of this. I began by asking him about what he made of India's response to the pandemic. Listen in.
So, observing from here, from the US side, I think what's been very clear is India took very firm and stringent response to the coronavirus crisis at a very early stage. So if you look at the numbers, when India implemented a lot of its policies, whether it was initial travel bans as early as mid-January, to finally the lockdown, which was subsequently extended, it happened when India had relatively few confirmed cases of the coronavirus and very few deaths. And in some ways, so you saw India move very quickly in this respect. And the reasons, I think, are manifold. I think there were also concerns about, the India being particularly vulnerable and the population, the numbers spiraling out of control. And that seems to have paid off, at least for now, which is that the overall trend lines have been relatively positive compared to most other countries, particularly Europe and the US, which have been very badly affected. And I just saw some polling numbers today from Gallup, the public opinion survey company, and that suggested that some 80% of people had, over 80% of Indians actually were positively disposed towards the Indian government's attitude or approach to the coronavirus. So that, I think, that the fact that there's large public support has been helpful as well.
Now, the US and Europe are the worst hit by the coronavirus. I asked Dhruva Jaishankar for his views on how the US and European governments have handled the crisis, and this is what he had to say.
So I think it varies very much country to country, even in the US, state by state. In Europe, for example, you've seen, say, a country like Germany where the numbers of infections has been very high, but the death rate has been very low, which suggests a very early intervention, good hospitalization, strong healthcare system, compared to, say, France or Italy or Spain, where even a comparable number of confirmed cases has led to a much larger number of fatalities. On the other hand, Eastern Europe, places like Greece have very small numbers of cases. So the ones that have been particularly badly hit have been Italy, Spain, France. Now Belgium and Netherlands are at the peak. Of course, the UK, Germany, and Turkey have been amongst the countries worst hit. In the US, it really, again, varies state by state. I think the US suffers from certain disadvantages, which is, unlike a lot of countries, it doesn't have a national policy part of the federal character of the country. So things like lockdowns are really on a state-by-state basis, and in some cases on a city-by-city basis or a county basis. So that has hampered efforts at combating this. And I think we may see, as a result, successive waves in the US. It may take much longer for the US to deal with this than many countries in Asia or Europe even. So that, I think, has been one major setback. The second is that the economic consequences in the US have been more different. So, say, a state like Florida in the southern U.S. Doesn't have income tax, and therefore is completely dependent on businesses to provide revenue to the government. So they've been very eager, the government there, to try and reopen businesses, even though they are not out of the worst stages of the coronavirus, because they simply need it as a source of revenue. And then finally, I think in the U.S., the lack of manufacturing capability, which has been outsourced to places like China and Korea and Taiwan and places like that, is now being felt. So essential commodities are now in short supply as a result of that, including protective equipment for healthcare workers. So this, I think, has really complicated and set back the U.S. response. The death toll has now crossed 50,000, is likely to increase. The number of confirmed cases will possibly cross 1 million total. So the US is quite badly hit. China is the hardest to say of the major economies, because the data from there is, I think, somewhat suspect. It's quite clear that they have brought it under control to some degree through very harsh measures in Wuhan and Hubei province in particular. But, I think there's some question marks about the actual numbers that have emerged from China.
Now, China has been in the news for the wrong reasons. The US has criticized China for not doing enough and not acting in time. Now, Dhruva Jaishankar says China may have a lot to answer for.
So I think there's immense anger against China, not places like Australia and the US, across party lines. It's not been restricted to the Trump administration. The Democrats have been equally upset in amongst European governments as well, who feel that they helped China in an hour of need, but now China is taking advantage of their situation. So I think there's a very clear sense that this is a made in China type problem. And China bears some accountability, particularly in terms of how its lack of transparency in the early stages of the epidemic in Wuhan, and its sort of cover up with the help, it seems, a certain politicization of the WHO, which led to its own reporting being underestimating the problem. Now, what at the same time, I think there's another factor which is also, I think, a factor for India as well, which is most countries at this point of time need China's help in terms of combating the immediacy of this crisis, in terms of providing, getting pharmaceutical ingredients, in India's case, getting protective equipment, and so forth. And so I think you will see some tactical cooperation continue, but I think in the medium to long term, there will be a lot of fingers being pointed at China, just because there is a widespread sense that this is an avoidable problem that China did not do its utmost to help keep in check.